The final weekend of October, the opportunity to make your case, to put yourself in position to win conference championships, and ultimately perhaps get into the college football playoff. This is the Picks edition of the College GameDay Podcast for Thursday, October 24th. Rece Davis, Steve Coughlin, better known as Stanford Steve, and Pete Thamel here with you, and reminding you to please subscribe so that you never miss a single episode of the College GameDay Podcast, or download wherever it is that you prefer to get your podcast. So Pete, Steve, last weekend, Steve got back on the winning track on the fridge after the first rough week of the year. Went 2-1, didn't you, big fella?
We did. Screw that fridge, Rece. Screw that fridge.
It was like when the fridge comes back, that's been my running thing all year. When you have a good week, no fridge, video board. When you have a bad week, the return of the fridge.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's like somehow with the spookiness of Halloween, that fridge is going to show up in a nightmare. I just want to make sure it's not in the flesh.
Out of a cornfield in Bloomington, the fridge emerges.
Exactly.
Steve.
You know, it's I did not know until Adrian, our producer, sent out the records. I really don't know how I did this. I went 7-0 last week, which probably ensures that I'm about to go 0 whatever this week. I didn't miss a game last week. How about that?
Well done.
ATS?
Can I get a little love? No, I'm sure it wasn't ATS. Okay. I think that was just straight up winners. That's all we're doing here. What we do, and people know this from listening every week, is we tell you first and foremost the most important thing, who we think will win the game. Of course, it doesn't mean we're right. But then we also give you a little hint if you happen to enjoy playing games of chance, as Steve does.
Hey, plenty of coaches out there would take it.
Yeah.
Win the week. Win the game.
Yeah.
You and Kurt Signetti rolling at 7-0.
And speaking of Signetti, let's start there, guys, with the picks. That's where College Game Day will be. I know that technically Indiana has not been on the list of power conference schools at which Game Day has not visited, but really we haven't. We were there in 2017, I believe it was, on a Thursday night. Ohio State was opening the season there, and it was a College Game Day show, but it was in the corner of the end zone on the field. It wasn't with all of the pomp and circumstance and the crowd. For all intents and purposes, this is the first game day visit to Bloomington, the first full-fledged Saturday morning game day visit to Bloomington for football. Yet again, another school, which we have been there for basketball, but not for football. And here come the Washington Huskies, fresh off, in a manner of speaking, a national championship appearance last year, but going through a transition, much like Indiana has gone through, but it has gone differently. It's just been about what you would expect from Washington. They've been okay. They've had some good moments, and they've had some tough ones. And now they're coming in to try to spoil things for Curt Signetti and the Hoosiers. The Hoosiers are without, we believe, and Pete's been all over this story, starting quarterback Kurtis Rourke for now, although there are hopes that he could come back against Michigan State. I believe that's next week, right, Pete?
Yeah, that's November 2nd in East Lansing. He had surgery Monday, and that's the sort of the hopeful target. It had been indefinite as they announced it. Surgery happened. And he, again, I don't want to sound probable for that, but that is the prognosis has improved, and that's that's viable, I guess, at this point. He's still doubtful for Saturday.
Okay, so it would go to Taven Jackson at quarterback. You have Washington coming in, who's capable on offense. Indiana coming off a victory over the first team at the time that had a winning record that the Hoosiers had faced. But the upside is that Indiana really hadn't been threatened. They had done what good teams do. They had beaten teams soundly that they were supposed to beat. So as you look at this, no starting quarterback, Washington coming off an impressive victory, the circus of game day coming to town. Pete, I'll start with you. Washington and Indiana, who do you like?
So I'll just start off generally by saying I've been impressed with what Jedd Fisch has been able to do at Washington, just considering the drastic roster turnover. He's found some holes. Will Rogers has been one of the most effective and efficient quarterbacks in the country. They don't have the same devastating offense that they did last year, but they weren't going to. They had 3 receivers picked in the top 100 in the draft. Michael Penix was a special talent. So Washington has done a nice job. But I am, look, it's hard just not to be in on Indiana at this point, right? Like, I was skeptical until the Nebraska game. I thought Nebraska was going to win that game. two things really stand out about Indiana. One is 27 portal players, Rece, and I really tip my cap to Curt Cignetti on the philosophy of how he's done this, right? He didn't take like 4 stars from Georgia and USC who didn't play. No, he took old veteran winners from Wake Forest, from Ohio, obviously 13 guys from JMU. And they've really just built a really, really good roster of strong college football players. And my line on Indiana is that they take you to the woodshed and then they go to the bar, because the average age on offense is 22. The average age on defense is 21 and a half. They are old, they are experienced, and they are just sort of devastatingly effective. And my last point here, I've probably gone too long, is when we've seen these revivals of traditional doormats, there's usually some kind of unconventional scheme no, not at Indiana. They're just running RPOs and running duo. They're just running college offense as everybody is running. They're just doing it better. So I'm going to take the Hoosiers.
Yeah, there's so much here. First off, with the game day inclinations, it's funny. Last year, in the madness of JMU, all I thought about was I don't think we mentioned App State once that day. And that was the team that they were playing. And like, you couldn't have a better scenario for an underdog team coming in. And what was a game? JMU was undefeated, I believe, till that point. And I went into the game, and it was an absolute frenzy. And App State played great, ended up winning in overtime in a remarkable game. And to me, this has those kind of feelings. When you look at the circumstances of, I hate to say, us coming to town, what Indiana has built to this point. Pete talked about it. That's what I find fascinating, is the decisions he made to build this thing up. And the idea to go get a MAC quarterback, a kid that's played just a ton of football. And when I watch him, just diving in this week, offensively, the plan, like, it's just organized, and their skill guys are better than you think. They do a great job of spreading you. But then you factor in Rourke getting hurt, and going back and watching it, I have him getting hurt on probably around the 20th play. He plays another, I'd say, 10 plays. The last play of the first half, you notice, a couple throws, you notice he can't fully grip the ball, and he's just throwing quick screens. And then the last play of the half, he throws a pick. He tries to throw a Hail Mary. It only goes like 40 yards. And the 4 plays before that, you see him grabbing his towel and trying to flex his thumb. So then, second half, Taven Jackson comes in. They're up 28-7, which I thought was really interesting, because it's like, all right, let's ride this thing. Get out of here. No, not Cignetti. Their offense, he comes in and play 39. From play 39 to 45, they score 2 touchdowns. They throw the ball 4 out of 6 plays, including a halfback pass, which was a tragedy. Don't show Sig that tape of that play. But I was really impressed with Taven Jackson, man. Like, he's people that get annoyed with the clap offense, with the fake claps more than anyone I've ever seen. So people watching the game, you're going to get a complex from watching how many times he does it. But in that little sample size, he looked tremendous. His throws were on point. He threw a fade for a touchdown. They run a pick play down in the end zone to get it, which I can't believe wasn't called. But the offensive line is constantly on the same page. In all this day and age, when you see these exotic blitzes, you hear Nick talk about what you got to do on the road, this and that. They've handled everything. And the most fascinating thing on the other side, who's trying to stop this team? A Belichick. That like, you can't script this stuff for what it is. So I'm gonna say Indiana wins inside, closer than a touchdown. Indiana wins. I'll take Washington plus the 6.5. Great job by Jedd Fisch this year. What he's done in assembling things in Seattle with all the turnover.
Yeah, the impact of Steve Belichick being their defensive coordinator. You have brothers coaching against each other.
Yeah.
A quarterback's coach from Indiana's Tino Sunseri. I think DB coach at UW is Vinny Sunseri, his younger brother. both sons of Sal Sinceri, who's having a good season there at Colorado as well. Mike Shanahan's done an unbelievable job with this offense. And to your point about Taven Jackson, he led 4 touchdown drives in the second half. So I would say this is a really important game for Taven Jackson. His dad is a police officer in Indiana, played at Washington State as the defensive back, and told both of his kids, you can go to school anywhere you want to except for 2 places. You can't go to Michigan and you can't go to Washington. So now Taven gets a chance to start. Cignetti, in his last 25 games as a head coach, is 24-1. The only loss is the one Steve mentioned when game day was at App State. Cignetti said he wasn't superstitious and was a little worried about how he handled it. He'd gone back and checked all of his notes about how he handled game day's visit to JMU last year. He will be on the show. We're grateful for that, and he will not be 24-2. I think Indiana wins. I think Indiana also covers. So I'm going to go with the Hoosiers winning by 10, although the one caveat I would offer is that Indiana hadn't won a Big Ten game by the margin that it had against Nebraska last week, 56-7, since 1945. They're also going to try to tie the best start in school history, which was 1967 when they started 8-0. I think they lost and tied after that, but still went to the Rose Bowl because of the old Big Ten tiebreakers. So this is historic. And sometimes when things change and all of a sudden you've really, really played your best game the previous week, there's a little bit of a regression. I'm going to say that they overcome that and they win by enough and they cover. LSU and Texas A&M, 2 teams that after the opening weekend of the regular season both had L's. LSU in Las Vegas, Texas A&M at home against Notre Dame. But since then, they've both been really good. A&M, when it was on a big stage against Missouri, absolutely blitzed the Tigers. LSU sort of pulled one out of the fire against Ole Miss. I believe I'm correct in saying they did not lead at any point in that game until they won it with a touchdown pass in overtime. So now 2 teams sitting there, no losses in conference play, ahead of the likes of Georgia and Texas, and now in position to stake a claim to get closer to that SEC championship game and ultimately a playoff berth. Steve, who do you like, LSU or A&M?
You know, Rece, there's this preconceived notion that I don't like LSU and I keep picking against them. That's true because I want to be wrong and I want game day to be there November 9th. So I'm going to continue that trend. I get it. I think I mentioned it the other day. Cignetti is undoubtedly the coach of the year, but my coach of the year is Mike Elko. Seeing what they were going to practice the day before the Notre Dame game, and I'm just saying to myself, I don't know if this team could do it. I mean, the offensive line was a mess. Wigman didn't look on the same page with receivers that didn't look like they were difference makers. The defense looked misaligned at times. And then all that hype, we come out and it basically comes down to 2 plays and they can't do it. The offense was brutal and the defense, stunts themselves out of 2 big plays, and that's how Notre Dame wins the game. And then you look at what they've done. He's played this thing perfectly. Holding back quarterback news, going to Florida and releasing Wigman is hurt and out, and then coming back against Missouri and getting Wigman back. I think he's just played that perfectly. It's the best defensive line in the country, in my opinion, what A&M brings to the table, the versatility. We heard Coach Saban talk for weeks about what Elko does in confusing quarterbacks. So I'm going to take A&M. I love what LSU has done, and I really hope we're there November 9th. So
who do they have November 9th?
Alabama.
LSU, Alabama.
Oh, I've heard of them. Them. Didn't they lose their coach?
Yeah.
So I'm going to echo Steve here. I ended up watching a pretty good chunk of A&M Mississippi State, and obviously watched enough of A&M Missouri to get a tenor of it. And I feel like the A&M defensive line, which going into the season was I thought one of the top three in the country, has really started to come into its own and play in that dominating way. And LSU, I got to give Blake Baker some credit. I don't think LSU has great defensive personnel right now, right? I just think they're okay. Perkins gone. He's obviously, an elite talent, but just generally, do they have a draft pick in their secondary? That's mind bending that LSU, Louisiana State University, with all those first round picks, all those corners, all those safeties, just is pedestrian back there. So a tip of the cap to them for figuring it out. I just think this game is going to be a bit of a slog. And I think A&M finds a way to win at home at night. And I'm going to echo what Steve said. It was not obvious to bring Connor Wegman back for that Missouri game. That was not an obvious decision at the time. I think a few people on our desk were wondering if Marcel Reed was going to kind of be a Wally Pipp situation. And that button push has gone really well. You score 41 against Missouri. You score 34 against State. So I just think A&M's got some momentum right now. And Mike Elko's career has been making the sum greater than the parts. And he's got pretty good parts, and the sum looks good.
The veteran hires of coaches has worked a couple of places and will work long-term most places if they have a track record, which Mike had put together one first as a defensive coordinator and with the job he did at Duke. And I marvel too at what A&M did with the quarterback. I thought Marcel Reed was probably the play because Wigman had been underwhelming and Reed gave them more of a run threat than Wigman did, but he came back and played really well against Missouri. So now you know how I'm setting you up. I'm going to run down these offenses that A&M has been able to contain. Notre Dame, Florida, Bowling Green, who, has played well against the big boys.
They got Arkansas. That tight end, man. He's good.
Yeah. He will not be there next year.
Arkansas.
Yeah, he'll be in the NFL.
Maybe, but it's a tight end. It's not, they're not,
Yeah.
Missouri. Underachieved probably relative to their talent. Mississippi State's gotten better on offense. They ain't seen Garrett Nussmeier, fellas. I know Howdy, College Station, Rocking at Night, Gig 'em. Nope. Give me LSU. I think LSU wins the game outright. I think LSU wins the game by more than a touchdown. So I'll take the Bayou Bengals going forward. And by the way, Steve, you brought it up too, and I think I put it on a tape this week someplace. That Whit Weeks play that he made against Arkansas was pretty elite. It was funny. I saw that someone had tweeted. I think it was Kyle Van Noy. Said that general managers take note of him. I don't care if he tests well. So I went back looking, trying to see. I was like, when I watch him play, I feel like he would test well. But maybe the elite top end speed's not there. It's certainly the situational awareness, the quickness, the instincts, the short area movement, different things. They were raving about him even before Harold Perkins got hurt. When I did the USC game at the beginning of the year, they're like, well, okay, we got to find a way to get him on the field, whatever that means. And whoever has to move positions, he's got to be on the field. And
he's my favorite player in college football. He's unbelievable.
Yeah, he's been wreaking havoc, man. I think they're getting better on defense. I believe in A&M too, but I'm going to take, when in doubt, and I'm not really in doubt on this, but if you think it's close, take the better quarterback. And Wigman's good, Nussmeier's better. I'll take Nussmeier and LSU to go in there as a little less than a field goal underdog and get the win outright. This is a tricky game in the Big Ten. Penn State is going to what seems to be an improving Wisconsin team. It's a night game in Camp Randall. Penn State has Ohio State coming up next week. Penn State's passed some road tests. They won at West Virginia. I know West Virginia's been a little disappointing, but first game of the season, that is not an easy place to play, especially if you're Penn State and they can't stand you there. They went to USC. Again, I understand USC is not vintage Trojans, and that's not the most intimidating environment in the world. It was still the 2+ time zone thing, afternoon game against a Trojan team that played well, really needed a win. Penn State came from behind and won the game. Now they've got Ohio State next week. this is the quintessential look ahead sandwich type game for Penn State as they take on with an improving Wisconsin team, which suddenly not only running the ball pretty well, but they've given up like 16 points in the last 3 games.
Yeah.
Pete, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's a fascinating litmus to this.
Wisconsin rivalries, right? Like, look, coming out of the loss to USC and the loss to Alabama, the Luke Fickell era was starting to look like a little bit of a sad trombone there. You know what I mean? They just hadn't found their footing, considering the remarkable, unprecedented success that he had at Cincinnati. I asked some people around Wisconsin this week, sort of, what's been the difference in that? And they just said they've kind of started to own the line of scrimmage a little bit, which you would expect a Luke Fickell team to do, right? He's obviously a former nose tackle, predicated on toughness. They found some balance on offense, and Tyree Walker, the Oklahoma transfer, has rolled. I am not ready to just declare they're going to go toe-to-toe with Penn State in the same way they did the last few weeks with Purdue, Rutgers, and Northwestern. They are stepping up a class. I think it will be fascinating. It wouldn't shock me if Wisconsin won, but right now, Penn State's just been too good offensively and too explosive offensively, and I don't think Wisconsin's offense is going to be able to move the ball with free will against Penn State's defense. So I think the Nittany Lions roll in and win by 10.
One of the best places for a Saturday night game, Madison. I truly believe it. It's tremendous being there numerous times. And, I'm glad you brought this stuff up about how it looked, Pete, because when I think of Luke Fickell, all I think about is his wrestling videos from his college days in high school. The man's just simply flat out a badass. And watching his team, it's like his team's always resembled him. And, they start out well against SC, and then, they get picked apart. To the LSU thing where people have said, it feels like their defense has found themselves without Perkins because maybe more guys know their role and they don't have to worry about where he's going to be lining up to adjust things. Van Dyke had plenty of hype coming in at quarterback, and Wisconsin loses him. And it looks like they've simplified things. They do what they're good at. And the biggest turnaround has been that defense. With Penn State, first time to see Tyler Warren after 17 catches and lining up at quarterback and running back and wide receiver. Kotelnicki looks like he's having as much fun as anyone calling plays in college football. But in that, I really thought that comeback against SC was enormous for Drew Aller. You talk to people there, they absolutely love him. He can make every throw. He's a leader. Everything you want in a quarterback. It just hasn't transformed on the field, and I thought you saw that. 3 4th downs on that game time drive. So I think there's a lot on the plate for Penn State. They did the travel. Now they're off a bye, and now you go to Madison, which will be revved up. And then obviously you have Ohio State waiting in the wings for a noon game. I would like to point out it's hysterical to me because I love putting Penn State fans in a tizzy, how mad they are that Maryland also beat USC because they were holding that road win at the Coliseum like it was the best thing in the world. And then here comes little old Maryland in the snake pit getting Trojans. So it's been a fun thing in the area seeing Penn State fans in a tizzy. Also knowing that it wasn't going to be a whiteout for Ohio State. I'm going to say Wisconsin keeps it close, but Penn State wins. Give me Wisconsin plus the points. Penn State wins the game.
Penn State fans can just say they softened them up for locks and the Terps.
They don't like saying that.
No, I know they don't. They don't love that at all. Run the ball, stop the run. If you can do those two things, you're going to win. You're going to win most football games. Penn State can do those two things, and Penn State's going to win this football game. Now, do I have some hesitancy because of some other great Penn State teams that have gone on the road at night? I think about some of those tight games at Iowa, a couple of years ago with Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley and those great teams. I think they won one like on the last play of the game or next to last or something like that. So I have a little bit of pause because of the spot with Ohio State coming next week. But Wisconsin hasn't been great at stopping the run. They're ranked like 87th in the country, about just under 4.5 yards per carry. Penn State's top 15 in the country and rushing offense. Penn State stops the run. They allow under 100 yards per game, and they're in 3.2 yards per carries in the top 15 in the country. I don't see how Wisconsin's going to score enough to keep this game close. So maybe they'll give them a fight for a while and ride some emotion. If they can get some turnovers, maybe they stay in the game. But I think Penn State goes in, takes care of business, and sets up yet another massive top 5 showdown, which this season has been defined by next week in Happy Valley against Ohio State, and they'll go in without a blemish on their record. Speaking of unblemished resumes, the midshipmen of Navy have that. They take on Notre Dame, MetLife Stadium. That's noon on ABC, immediately following College GameDay on ESPN. This is a ranked versus ranked game. We have a handful of those this weekend. Notre Dame's favored by 12.5. And while the Irish most years see Navy, they're accustomed to the option offense, even if you just see it once a year. But there's a little bit of a twist on this. Navy's doing some other things, as Nick Saban showed in the film room last week. Who do you like, Steve? Do you like the midshipmen to be able to keep this dream alive of back-to-back Army-Navy games, one in the American Championship and one regularly scheduled? Or not that this will affect that, I know, but in terms of making the playoff, this is a big deal for both Notre Dame because they can't afford another loss like this, and for Navy because if they're going to win the American and get in as a conference champion, they really need to do so with an unblemished record, I would say. That would give them a better chance in going in as a one-loss champion of the American.
Yeah, this one's tough. As much as I love Chronic in that Sling T offense that he's brought to Annapolis, they've been a real treat to watch. And the idea of watching Navy throw the football down the field, and it feels like every time they throw it, they score. And then I just went back. Their defense really hasn't played anything. I'm not saying Notre Dame's a great offense, but Notre Dame's talent on the offensive side is superior to anything they have. They played Memphis, who's the best team they played. They won 56-44. So this obviously comes down to Notre Dame's defense, which Marcus Freeman prides himself on. And I thought it was really interesting going back and watching the tape against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's a team I love what they do offensively. You know, we had Sark last week talk about, he even said, sometimes what we do pre-snap is more important than what we do post-snap. Georgia Tech puts everything at you pre-snap. And watching Notre Dame and with the injuries they had, they were never not on the same page. And that's huge for a secondary, for second-level guys. It's enormous. But now, not being on the same page, now it's every guy has assignment. It's assignment defense. It's assignment football against Navy. I feel like go against the trend here. I believe Notre Dame wins and covers by 2 touchdowns.
Interesting.
I actually feel the same. First of all, Rece, you said we shouldn't call it the Sling T. I still want to call it the Sling T. Is that okay?
It's so cool. Yeah, it's so cool. Chronic doesn't like it. He said he told me
know that.
He told me he cringes, but I'm like, well, but you kind of understand it because they're throwing it. Some writer came up with it, I guess. And his dad has the wing T background as a high school coach, in Georgia and all of that. And so he's incorporated a little bit of everything, but I don't know. I think it's a cool moniker.
Awesome.
I think, you know what? I'll digress a little bit. For a long time when I was in local television, because when I was a little kid, I didn't like being called Reese Cup or Reese's Pieces. So my first stop in local, I avoided calling the quintessential local goofy highlight segment that. When I got to Flint, Michigan, I was like, what's wrong with you? Make it memorable. Just do it, So I started calling that, and I remember Morris Peterson one time, he'd been in the league 10 years or something, said, I still remember when you put me on Reese's Pieces. So I implored Drew Chronic to just embrace the Sling T moniker. But anyway,
throw it on a T-shirt.
Yeah, it'd be great. Put it on T-shirt.
Drew Chronic, really good at moving the ball and scoring points. Probably not great at marketing. And that's okay. When you've coached at Reinhardt, when you've been the OC at Furman, when you've been the head coach at Lenore, Ryan, and Mercer, and dominated at all those stops, you probably know a little bit of something about moving the ball. He was actually at Georgia. He was a teammate of Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo, and as he said to me recently, well, we were on the team together. um, my favorite fact about this Navy team, look, we've been lucky enough to be around a lot of these academy guys, and they're all awesome, remarkable young men who just sort of like restore your hope in society. How about Daba Fafana is a cello player. He's the very effective tailback for Navy. I unfortunately think like the dream of the great academy collision with like dual playoff stakes is unfortunately I don't think it's going to happen. I just have a hard time seeing Navy just step up in class here with Notre Dame. It'd be a heck of a lot of fun and be good for the sport, and I really hope they can grind the game down against Notre Dame. But I think the T will stop slinging at the rate it's been. So I'm going to go with the Irish.
I do want to point out, and I know you guys know this, and for everyone listening, just to make sure we know that this game has no bearing on whether Navy makes the American Conference Championship game.
Yes,
and Army, Army for its part and its purpose in this only has two more conference games left, so they're close to clinching,
yes.
at least a tie and at least a spot in there. So what we're talking about is that because of the overall strength of schedule, it is unlikely that Navy could suffer any loss, but especially if it were to be a decisive one to Notre Dame. And even if it were to emerge as champion of the American, would that then put them in position to be ranked higher than, for instance, the Mountain West champion, or if Boise State were to move into that top four highest ranked conference champion realm, and there's utter chaos in, say, the Big 12 or the ACC, would they be higher ranked than the champions of those leagues? Would they lost to Notre Dame, particularly if it is a decisive one? I would say that's unlikely. I know with the new offense, it is way different than last year in Dublin when Notre Dame just took Navy apart and beat them 42-3. I think I understand that Navy's better and their differences, and Horvath is a really, really good player. And I want to be contrarian, and I think there will be moments in which Navy catches Notre Dame in something, gets big plays. To Steve's point, Steve, they have 50 completions this year, and 11 of them have gone for touchdowns. That's a pretty high. That's a pretty high percentage. They're like 50 of 81 throwing the ball for 11 touchdowns. And they do some drop back passing now. They obviously do the stuff off the option, which can get you some man coverage and so forth. So I want to be a contrarian. I think what you're going to be dealing with is not questioning whether Notre Dame is going to win the game, but questioning whether Notre Dame covers. Now, the one little caveat, I'm going to pick Notre Dame and say they cover barely. The one caveat I would say is that when you're dealing with the option, you have to be assignment sound. You have to trust each other. You have to know where your teammate's going to be. And Notre Dame's had some injuries on defense, so they've had to plug in some different pieces there. So when they get caught out of position a couple of times, it's not going to be some big surprise. But I do think Notre Dame wins, covers. I don't think Navy gets blown out like last year.
No,
but I do think that they give Notre Dame pause a few times throughout the day. But I think the Irish end up winning it and covering the game. Texas coming off that wild affair in Austin where they fought back in the second half, but really, didn't get close to winning the game. And now after Oklahoma, after Georgia, now they go on the road to previously sleepy Nashville and Vanderbilt, maybe alive a little bit now. I mean, can you even conceive of a world? Steve, I'm going to start with you. I don't remember who started last time, so now you get first swing at this. Can you conceive of a world in which Vanderbilt, coming off, what was it last year, a 2-win season, I think?
Yeah.
Vanderbilt's coming off a 2-win season in which they did not win a single conference game, and then to come back the next year, go to a bowl and beat Alabama and Texas in the same season? What do you think about Texas and Vanderbilt on Saturday?
Pete, it's funny. Like we've talked about Cignetti and obviously him coaching so long, and having people to go to, and people, the branches, the fraternity of coaches. It's amazing to me how happy guys that have coached with Clark Lee previously are for him. Like, I mean, he came out and did his thing at SEC Media Days. What was that, 4 years ago? Where he said it's the best job in America and this and that. And, we're going to Indiana. We just talked about Elko, how much we think of him. And I know he's not like this, but he's got to be sitting there like, man, I beat Alabama here at Vanderbilt, and no one is going to bring me up for Coach of the Year. Well, Coach, guess what? You got Texas, and they're off a loss this week. This number is 18 points, which I feel like is a lot. Going back and watching Texas, we talked ad nauseum about how they hadn't played a superior team. Not saying, to Georgia's caliber, but just a team that could bring physicality, a team that could bring dynamic play calling offensively. And Georgia put it to them. They made their guys tackle in space. They didn't do that. They punished them physically. Texas hadn't seen that. And now with all those bumps and bruises, that Texas defense has to get up and go against a team that gives you eye candy, gives you a quarterback who has zero care about what his stat line is. He wants to win a darn football game. And Vanderbilt's also undefeated as an underdog this season. People are having fun connecting the dots with Georgia State and how Vandy lost to them. And then there's an inkling to beating Georgia. But so this is a big spot for Sark because I think everybody just sees them, matriculating along and getting in the SEC championship, and their road to a playoff is huge. But this is different. It'll be a home game for Texas. I do think in the end their offense scores enough. I'll say it's a really high scoring game, and Texas wins. Vanderbilt covers the 18.
Diego Pavia is not going to lose by 19 points. That's just not going to happen. Like, that's just Diego Pavia lives to be like a multiple touchdown underdog. Okay. And he sees that line and he thinks it's a little bit turnt. Is that the correct word? So
yeah,
I have a hard time envisioning Vanderbilt winning this game, but at the same time, I don't see a world where Texas goes in and steamrolls them. So I think this ends up being a chippy little game for a few quarters. And then, it'd be interesting to see how Quinn Ewers settles in, right? Obviously, he didn't have much of a chance against Texas. Their O-line got smoked. Kelvin Banks had one of the worst games I've seen a left tackle play, and he's a very, very good left tackle. He's probably going to be he might be a guard now with the way
he might have cost himself some money.
And he might end up sliding inside from what Michael Williams and the boys did to him. He was not good, and he's been great, right? Like he gave up like 1 sack in his whole career, or he had like crazy numbers before then. So it had been a fairly adversity-free season for Texas. Like their biggest adversity was like, oh, is Arch going to take the starting job? No, he's not. Blah, blah, blah. So it will be a good test of mettle here. I can already hear Kirk talking about the construction cranes looming over the stadium. But I'll take Vanderbilt to cover, but Texas to win.
I had our tremendous researcher, Marissa Dowling, look this up. Texas has played 633 games as a ranked team, 236 of them as a top 5 team. Vanderbilt has played 27 games as a ranked team. Vanderbilt's last such game as a ranked team came in October of 2008. Their last win as a ranked team came 2 weeks earlier in that 2008 season. I agree with you guys. Let's not bury the lead here. Texas wins, Vanderbilt covers. Here's something to watch. Last couple of years under Steve Sarkisian, after physical or emotional wins. Last year, after the emotional and physical win against Alabama, they found themselves tied at 10 against Wyoming in the fourth quarter. Now, it was a solid Wyoming team. No business being tied with Wyoming in the fourth quarter, let alone tied with only 10 points on the board. But that's where they were. They pulled away to win, to their credit. After an emotional loss last year to Oklahoma, Texas scuffled around with a 4-win Houston team, had to get a stop on 4th and 1 at the Texas 10-yard line and won by 7, and they greatly benefited from a horrific spot on third down where it looked as if Houston had picked up the first down and they weren't
Yeah.
giving that, and then Texas got the stop on fourth. My only point in bringing that up is the struggle. In 2022, after the Oklahoma game, again, emotional, but this time a win, they barely beat a 4-win Iowa State team the next week by a field goal. So now you've got Texas coming off Oklahoma rivalry, always emotional, trying to avenge a loss from the previous year, and Georgia, physical. There's carryover there. Sometimes takes you a week or so to get over, playing Georgia because of the toll it takes physically. But Texas has had some issues coming off physical and or emotional games in terms of being totally locked in. And now, as Steve referenced earlier, look, I know Vandy gets upset about this. It's just a fact of life. They may be on their home field. The opposing crowd for the big schools almost always outnumbers them. I know Alabama and Tennessee fans in the past who have bought season tickets to Vanderbilt games, never used them, maybe given them away for the sole purpose of going to the Tennessee or Alabama game when it is at Vanderbilt. The biggest upset of the season wasn't necessarily that Vanderbilt beat Alabama, but there were enough Vanderbilt fans to carry the goalposts down Broadway and throw them into the river. That was a massive upset. I was told that there were people trying to get into the stadium when they realized that the upset was happening. And at first they were like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. And then they're like, oh, what the heck? I think they finally let the students come in. They hadn't been there before. But there is some energy around Vanderbilt now, so I expect Vanderbilt to have a decent crowd there, but Burnt Orange will show up. And again, there's too much groupthink right now. I can't see Pavia getting blown out, especially with Texas maybe a little battered and bruised after last weekend. So I think Texas finds a way to win the game. But I figure Vanderbilt makes it really, really interesting, and Pavia does some of that magic escape stuff along the way, and we get rolling and get another Texas win and another moment for Vanderbilt, which will be a positive, particularly considering what they've overcome, where Clark Lee has them, and Vandy will get bowl eligible, but it might just take another week to do it. Let's have a look at the Friday night game, Pete. We'll start Boise State and UNLV. Boise State, as we did on the College Football Playoff Top 25 show, showed that they're ranked 17th by the AP poll. If that were reflective of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings, Boise State would be the 12th seed. They would get into the playoff. So UNLV also sitting there with just one loss. Games in Vegas. How do you see it?
Boy, I mean, can you really pick against Ash and Genty at this point? Right? This is their, other than Oregon, their biggest showcase of the season. And let's be honest, like nobody was really thought Boise was going to go toe to toe with Oregon that day, right? They had just come off that slugfest in Statesboro. But just Genty's been remarkable, and until somebody stops him, I'm not going to predict somebody's going to stop him.
Yeah, something's got to give here. Looking at some of the numbers, Boise State's covered 5 straight games, longest active streak in the country. UNLV is 4-1 ATS against ranked teams since 2021. That's second best over that span. Plenty of offense in this game, which will be fun. Pete, this is so typical. We're gonna get in the car Saturday morning. This is a 10:30 kickoff Friday night, and I'll probably catch the highlights, and you're gonna be like, I was on the phone and I ended up staying up. It was a close game. Like, Pete, that game got over at 2 in the morning. It's 6 a.m.
Yeah. And people wonder why I'm streamlining coffee into my veins before our show starts. College football, I can't quit you.
No, super bummed, but this will be the first game I go back and watch on tape. I love the idea of Barry Odom as an underdog, thriving in this role. Should be a fun atmosphere. UNLV's been able to draw some people to their game. Boise State travels well, but Boise State's showing really good balance on offense. Plenty of attention was made, when Coach made the quarterback move. It was a surprise. His former 5-star from SC that everybody thought was going to get the job. No, and they've scored plenty. I believe that run game is going to be too much. Boise State's defense has a chance to show out here. If you go back and watch Oregon, they hung in there defensively. They made Dylan Gabriel uncomfortable. Oregon had some huge plays in special teams that really got them back in the game. So I would say Boise State defense, run game, wins and covers that 2.5, 3 points, whatever it is.
Yeah, 100%. Everything you guys have said. I'm not betting against Genty. Boise State is better on defense than you think. Oregon needed 2 returns for touchdowns to win the game in Eugene. And Genty, he hasn't just piled up these numbers against the other teams. He put up big numbers against Oregon. He had a 70-yard touchdown run, against the Ducks. Now, is Oregon better now? Were they better against Ohio State than they were early in the season against Boise? Sure. But I think Boise State is a really good team. UNLV solid as well, but not enough points. I like Boise State to win the game. Maybe if it were a touchdown or something, I'd say take the Rebels and the points, but Boise to win, not enough. I mean, basically with that line sitting there, 2.5? Mm-hmm. Basically, you're saying, who do you think wins the game? And I think it's Boise State. So I'll take Boise State to win and cover. And we go deep cut, and it's rare that we go a deep cut pick here when you have a team that is ranked. But SMU is at Duke. Now, SMU does not play. Now, remember, SMU's in the ACC. SMU does not play Clemson or Miami. Clemson does not play Miami. There's an opportunity that all 3 of these teams wind up without a loss in conference play, and then you unleash tiebreakers, which could happen a lot of places, especially for the second spot in conference championship games. So this is a pretty important game for the Mustangs. They do have Pitt, by the way, which is still in this race too. Everybody sort of forgets about Narduzzi's Panthers, who are playing well. But this is an opportunity for Duke. Duke has Miami next week. It is an 11.5-point line right now for the Mustangs against Manny Diaz's club. Steve, who do you like in that ACC showdown?
I love what I've seen from both teams, obviously, this year. SMU's got their legs now that Jennings is the quarterback. Duke is great as it's been. There was a point last Friday night where I'm like, are they really going to blow this game to Florida State? But to their credit, they gutted it out and got the win.
Think about what you just said. Is Duke going to blow the game to Florida State? That's like
we were watching it together. Yeah.
My son is we know, who played baseball at Duke as a graduate student after his career at Princeton, said there was a great thing going around. So I said that to say I wouldn't consider him this hardcore Duke football fan, but he does follow them. He said that there was a great meme going around or something from the Duke people saying nobody beats us 23 times in a row. Florida State, because they've been 0-22 against them or whatever. So
sorry, Steve. That just
No, we were watching it together. It's are they really? You come all this way, and then you can't do that. I don't think SMU is going to score on the first play of the game, which they did against Stanford last week. It's a lot.
Not that you remember.
No, they didn't. I did ask Coach Lashley to take it easy on us. He did let up a little bit in the second half. Thank you. 40-10, we'll take it. SMU's offense, it goes back to that. When you go back, Duke, the lone ACC loss, Georgia Tech, I talked about earlier how much I love that offense. I like the explosiveness here for SMU. So I am going to say they win and cover. I don't think Duke's offense could keep up with SMU's.
That is a stolen rationale that I will reiterate. Duke's passing offense is 80th. Their scoring offense is 83rd. Malik Murphy has been very good at figuring out how to win games, but they're not going to win a shootout. So Manny's had a good defense there. They played well, but I think SMU is going to figure out a way to score it. I will say this, RJ Maryland, who's maybe been their most effective skill weapon on offense, is out for the season. I see Steve nodding. He obviously only follows tight ends. He doesn't follow quarterbacks when he covers football. So that's a big loss. Russell Maryland's son. So it will be interesting how they overcome that, but I think they figure it out.
I tend to agree. I mean, Duke, for all the great things they've done, and Manny's done a tremendous job. They were behind 20-0 to North Carolina. They did mess around with the Florida State team, which is, as you guys said earlier, they really going to lose this game. But they are top 25 in total defense. They lead the nation in tackles for loss. They're number 7 in sacks. They can get you off schedule because of the style of defense that they play. The question is, can they score enough? SMU, since making the quarterback change, has scored at least 34 points in every game. It's really hard. Even if they don't quite get to that number, it's hard to see Duke getting close to that. So I'm going to take SMU to win the game. I'm going to go ahead and take SMU to cover too. I mean that, you're probably only a couple of sacks or TFLs away from Duke being able to stay inside that number, particularly if the sack also involves a fumble, something like that. But I'm going to say on balance that I think the offensive firepower will carry the day for SMU, and they'll win it. I didn't keep up with it, but I'm not sure that we disagreed very often. So there might be just a game or two on this entire ledger that carries today about who has the best week. And it also probably ought to serve as a warning to our loyal listeners. If you are inclined to play games of chance, you might want to fade all of us if we're all thinking the same way. It might be a good way to couch your bet.
No graphics saved here.
Yeah. Are you confident, Steve? Or how do you feel about this week generally? Are you confident in your picks, or do you feel like we've reached a point of the season where a lot of it is determined by who's sleepwalking and who's not, and who's looking ahead and who's not, and all of those types of things?
I thought you'd I'd love to get some context. Like you meant when we brought up the idea of Penn State, Ohio State next week, another top 5 matchup. This feels like a record-setting pace we're on, and us, being fortunate enough to be at a bunch of these. But I still feel like there's teams that we don't know all that we need to know about, like Navy, is a team that, now we get to see, they've done what they're supposed to do. And I always say, you can only play the teams that are on your schedule, and then you figure out Indiana. You get to, find out what you have as far as a program with a backup quarterback in a monster situation. Alabama. We didn't even talk about them, like what their road and, the playoff predictor and what their chances are. A&M getting back, not playing the greatest teams, but still not losing since they lost that opening game. So there's a lot going on. I will say the most fascinating game to me is BYU going on the road. That game is basically a pick 'em. I've even seen UCF favored by a point in that game. Like that, and then number 1, Oregon is giving 25 points to Illinois.
Not enough.
Like it's
Not
crazy. The balance when you look at that, the AP standings, whatever. I still feel like we there's a lot more learning to do, as my mom would say.
All right, Pete. Final word here. What do you got?
I'm excited to see what Bloomington unfurls for us. There's something special in college sports about something happening for the first time, a team's first NCAA tournament bid, first week, and like this is Indiana's first football moment. We're in the middle of it, and I'm excited to see what it looks like, feels like, and the energy from it this weekend.
Can't wait to see it as well. Thanks for joining us on the College GameDay Podcast. Subscribe so you never miss an episode, or download wherever you prefer to get your podcast.